So, continuing our series on Rebbe Nachman's book, Outpouring of the Soul. The chapter for tonight is the chapter on encouragement. It's actually quite long. It may take us some time to get through it. Tonight I just want to hit the highlights of it, a couple of key points. At one point it says, the Rebbe says that a person's prayers are sometimes devoid of enthusiasm and feeling. At such times, one must arouse his own emotions and make the words burst like a fire in his heart. Burst like a fire in his heart. So when you're devoid of enthusiasm and feeling in your prayer or your meditation or your spiritual life, whatever it is, you must call forth this kind of an emotional fire from within yourself so that it begins to burn. Now, some of you may be familiar with the Nichiren Shoshu sect of Buddhism. Nowadays they call themselves the Soka Gakkai. It's a group that chants Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, right? And I have many, many friends within this movement. I've met the leader of the movement in Japan, Daisaku Ikeda. I've written a book about them, traveled to Japan twice. So they're a group that I know very intimately. Partly as a writer and as a person who studies such things, but partly just out of affinity because I basically like their practice. Their practice is discussion group, like we have here, from 7:30 to 9 every Thursday night. They have a discussion group model. They have a chanting model as well. They don't do seated meditation like we do, but there are many things in common. One of the things that they do that's extremely impressive is that they give ordinary people a spiritual tool for overcoming obstacles in their lives. And these obstacles could be financial, they could be emotional, they could be an addiction, a difficult relationship, they could be business problems, they could, the list goes on and on. Problems with family, with children, with a neighbor. These obstacles that present themselves and that one naturally, if he or she is engaged in spiritual life, wants to make the subject of a prayer. These are the things we should be praying about. These are the actual raw stuff of our lives. These are the things that get in our way, keep us from finding fulfillment or happiness. So these are the raw stuff of prayer. And this particular group is based on the teachings of Nichiren, who is kind of a revolutionary teacher who lived in Japan some 7 or 8 centuries ago. Involves chanting this chant. Most of the time people will, in the morning and in the evening, they'll chant the Lotus Sutra, and then they'll chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, which is the title of the Lotus Sutra. And then they'll make their petitions and various prayers, light some incense, strike a bell, and go to bed. In the morning they'll get up and they'll do the same thing again. But every once in a while you find these people in a pitched battle against some particular obstacle. And I've seen this happen many, many times. And they stick with it until they find a way to ignite such a fire in their prayer life that it burns right through whatever the obstacle is, and they find their way to the other side. And sometimes the solutions are surprising. Sometimes the solution to an obstacle is to simply walk around it. Sometimes the solution is to realize that you're on the wrong path. That's why you have an obstacle in front of you. You're going the wrong way, in which case the obstacle actually becomes a signpost, and you take a new path through life. Sometimes the obstacle is an inner obstacle that doesn't really exist in the outer world, and if we lean into it and take a step in that direction, it parts. The famous midrash. Midrash is comes from the Jewish tradition. It's a way of reading between the lines of Scripture, right? So you find a piece of Scripture from the Torah usually that is interesting, but it raises a question. There is a midrash on the Torah about Moses and the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. And the midrash says they came up to the sea. Moses took up his staff and raised it, told the sea to part, and nothing happened. So they're all standing there. Meanwhile, the Egyptians are coming. Things are getting pretty dire, right? I guess Moses is saying something like, "Pray harder, everybody! Come on, everybody! I guess if you were a Nichiren Buddhist, they say, chant more Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, right? Chant it better, chant it faster, chant it harder, chant it with more sincerity, whatever. So he's shaking his staff and nothing's happening. Finally, this one guy just sort of gets sick of it. He says, oh, what the hell? And he walks up and he puts his foot in the sea and it parts. And they all go through. It took one person leaning into that obstacle to see that it wasn't actually there and that they could simply walk straight through it. So there are all kinds of obstacles like that that come up and that we face. The thing that from the Nichiren teachings that is called to mind here when I read this is this business about one must arouse one's own emotions and make the words burn like a fire in his heart. Nichiren says that when you are trying to break through a very difficult problem, you should chant as if you were trying to bring a spark from damp wood. You should chant as if you were trying to coax a spark out of damp wood. And that means that there can be no half-hearted measure. That if you really want this thing, if you want this issue to be resolved, if you want this thing to happen, if you want this happiness in your life or this spiritual knowledge or illumination or whatever it is, and it could be anything. There's a whole full palette of things that are offered to us in any given day, in any given week, month, or year, or lifetime to choose from. And most of them that we're supposed to have really are there for the having. So it only requires us to reach out for them. But sometimes that takes a bit of fire. And when we don't feel particularly enthusiastic, then we arouse that enthusiasm by leaning forward into it. It's like leaning the body forward. If you do that and you lean far enough, your foot will automatically come out in front of you and you will find yourself taking a step forward. And the spiritual journey really works very much like that. Namo